Hello there, this is Philip Corper. This is the Philip Corper Show. I wanted to do a quick, just a little video on pandemics. And with this big COVID-19 response that we did, this huge worldwide reaction, I've just been wondering, was this justified? Did we do the right thing? What is the post-mortem on this going to be? I was researching back on previous pandemics. We had the 1918 pandemic, that was H1N1 virus, known as the Spanish flu. The estimates on the CDC website is 675,000 people died. A lot of those deaths were attributed to not having any antibiotics. So we know when we get this virus, an influenza virus, coronavirus, these types of infections, sometimes the response is really pretty minimal, but we get super infections or other bacterial infections. It makes us weaker and more susceptible to other illnesses when we come down with like the flu or a flu-like illness. And so many of these deaths during this period were blamed for not having any antibiotics at the time. I wanted to remind everyone, these numbers on these deaths are very hard to figure out. These are just big, huge estimations. And so I'm just using the CDC as maybe a credible source here, the best we got, politics involved. That's what their website is saying as of today, 675,000, which is a lot of people, obviously. That was a big deal. And I wanted to talk about the 1957-58 pandemic. That's the next pandemic that the CDC lists, H2N2 virus. So they estimate 116,000 people died in the United States from this virus, this influenza virus. That's just a gross estimate, 116,000. They also, the CDC lists 1968. There's always kind of at the end of the decade. So this is the third pandemic they talk about, H3N2 virus. They estimate 100,000 people died from that pandemic. And then we had the 2009 H1N1 pandemic. So they called this H1N1 like PDM09, like a pandemic 09. And so this was a little bit different because this is kind of a variant of the influenza from the 1918 H1N1. And yet this affected young people, and that was really surprising. Older people were found to have antibodies, but younger people don't. I had a nephew who at 5 in Southern California got really sick from swine flu, or this 2009. And the vaccine did come out, but the peak had already come out. And we had already gotten over the peak. The virus was pretty much going away at the time. The vaccine came out, not very many people used that. President Obama was the president. Fauci was still there giving his expert advice. And I felt like President Obama really did the great thing. So at about an estimate of 18,000 people who were already died from this, President Obama and Fauci, they ended all the testing, which is what the CDC recommended in the COVID-19 pandemic that we're in. And the hospitals just took care of the sick, and the virus tailed out and when it was done. No huge measures were done, no big lockdowns, mask wearing, and none of this ever happened. None of this has really ever happened in any of this. Some cities back in the 1918 pandemic quarantined and did those things, but that was back in 1918. But none of these more recent types of pandemics, nothing has been done. This H1N1 from the swine flu, the 2009 pandemic, continues to circulate today. They estimated, the website, the CDC website's hilarious, 12,469 deaths. That's an estimate. It doesn't look like an estimate. It looks very exact and precise. They have no idea. There's a big, huge range there. And so that's just a guess. It's a guess. But not very many people died from the swine flu or the 2009 epidemic. I felt like President Obama and Fauci did a really good job in managing that from a public health perspective. Zika virus came out. Remember, this was a big deal in 2015, 2016. And there was hysteria about this causing microcephaly. So babies born with very small brains. And so this was a big scare. Disney was posting warning signs, I remember, because this is a mosquito-borne virus for the most part. Can be passed on through sexual intercourse, blood transfusion possibly. There are other modes of transmission. And very deadly virus, actually not very deadly virus, but this potential for microcephaly really caught the world's attention. It turns out, even though the CDC website still talks about this possibility of microcephaly, so if a pregnant lady gets Zika virus infection, she might have a baby that has a very small brain and is mentally retarded and undeveloped. And so it turns out a year later, NPR wrote an article, and WHO agreed or suggested that no, it looks like we were wrong about the microcephaly. That was just kind of a normal population there. The increase in Zika infections did not cause a lot of babies to be born with small brains. So once again, I mean, it's possible that the CDC can be incorrect. And they definitely and still are posting this information on their website, which I feel is totally incorrect. There is no evidence that Zika causes microcephaly. It's possible, right? Anything's possible, but no real evidence. And so I wanted to point that out. And then now I wanted to talk about our COVID-19 type of response. Tony Fauci has not said that this is the worst pandemic we've ever had, okay? Although our numbers now, the numbers are close to 500,000 people are dead, supposedly, of COVID-19 infection, this disease. So that's a really pretty big number, and that's approaching the 1918 numbers of the Spanish flu. So no one is really saying that this is that much worse. And I think the CDC posted that only 6% of these cases are really, of the deaths, are due to the virus. Everything else is that these patients have other life-threatening events, heart attacks, strokes, and things. They're dying of those things, but they happen to have a positive test. They happen to have a possible COVID-19 infection. And so they're dying of a heart attack, but they happen to have the virus too. There's great debate over this and that the virus is hastening their death. But the CDC said 6% of the people are dying. So if you look at those numbers, if you take 500,000 people and 6% of that would just be 30,000 people dead of COVID-19. 30,000. So you can see that this pandemic that we're in right now of this COVID-19 is very small and not as large as these previous pandemics that we've had in the United States. Fauci has admitted that sometimes when we're doing our testing, it's a positive test and it's dead virus, like in our nose. The virus is already dead. So it's not contagious. So you can have, and there's many false positive tests. The testing has been completely unregulated. No FDA approval on the testing. The CDC originally just wanted to do the tests on their own because we never have done these big national tests like this. We didn't have the test kits because we didn't really need them. We didn't have the masks because they've been proven. 14 randomized controlled trials have taught us that masking in flu pandemics is not a public health issue. It's not helpful. I mean, the CDC even says that only N95 masks should be worn by healthcare providers in hospitals. Those do help decrease the amount of virus that you can get in your respiratory system, but they're only reserved for the healthcare workers, even to this day. So you know a lot of this doesn't make very much sense. It's not as common sense as Dr. Fauci says. So lots of false positives. San Diego had an increase in Rona admissions. but no overall increase in hospitalizations. Not all states publish their hospitalization data, but you can look at Florida, you can look at a few other states. There has been no increase in hospitalizations, overall big, huge increase if you look back through the months through this whole pandemic and compare it to previous years. You can't find a big increase in death rates at all either. Believe me, if there was, we would know about it. The people promoting this pandemic would definitely use those numbers to justify why all these people are dying. I have failed to see any evidence that a whole lot of extra people in America are dying from COVID-19. I can't find that. It looks to me that it's probably around 20 or 30,000 deaths from COVID-19, not 500,000 deaths. I'm willing to look at any evidence that shows that a lot of people are dying from this. There are deaths. And in America, every day, there are like 7,500 deaths. We know people are dying, but are they really dying from this illness? It looks like a very small number is really actually the true numbers, rather than this big, huge 500,000 people dead. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about when you test positive for COVID-19, you're really testing positive for SARS-CoV-2 test. That is the positive test, but it doesn't mean, so that's a testing for the virus, maybe alive, maybe dead, as I mentioned before, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have the disease. The disease is COVID-19. I want to compare that to HIV. You can test positive to HIV, but not have the disease, which is HIV/AIDS. I wanted to make that distinction. And so I wanted to compare this like common sense. So, because a lot of the people are telling us common sense right now. I wanted to dispel that myth. I mean, it's common sense that the earth is flat. When I look out at the earth outside, it looks flat to me. It's like common sense, right? But we know that the earth is round. Pythagoras figured this out in 600 BC. I mean, he was looking at the moon and the moon was round and he thought the earth was round. And then he used a lot of other mathematical ways to determine actually even the circumference of the earth is eventually what the scientists discovered. You might think it's common sense to wear 2 condoms. Well, no, science shows that 2 condoms is worse than 1 condom. There's friction that doesn't work as well. It might be common sense to wear 2 masks. No, there's no scientific evidence that that even helps. As a matter of fact, there's no scientific evidence, as I mentioned before, that wearing masks as a public health policy in a pandemic is even helpful at all. As a matter of fact, it's probably harmful. And that's why we have never worn masks like this in any of these pandemics. It's never been recommended. They've never been stockpiled because they have been proven not to work. That's why we have the FDA. The FDA lets us know if something really works. Not that it may work, but that it's scientifically, we can prove that it does work by using randomized controlled trials. We're way beyond the science here. I guess we're just thinking about common sense. So I wanted to make that point. And I just wanted to try to clear up some of those, the myths that we do believe. I really don't see any evidence that all that we've done in this response in 2020, a worldwide response of locking cities down, of closing schools, closing churches, closing travel, even getting to the vaccine. You know, we'll be able to find out here, you know, if this was really the appropriate public response. I'm not a big fan of public health, not a big fan of these experts who seem to know it all, using common sense, to really alter our liberty and our freedoms. But even just from a personal health standpoint, I really love the relationship that we have with our physicians. So if we get sick, if we want healthcare, we can go to our doctors and ask them, you know, what their opinions are. And we can be treated that way rather than a top-down Dr. Fauci dictating the health care for everyone, or using the example of Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York. They were hysterical in New York. They were clamoring for ventilators that they never need. They were clamoring for hospital beds that they never need. The Mercy ship was empty. The Java Center was empty. And yet they thought all of these people were going to get sick and needed these ventilators. So the sick elderly people in the hospital were all sent back to the nursing homes to die of normal illnesses. And we didn't even have testing back then like we do now. Testing, which is very inaccurate and not even FDA approved. It's just emergency use only. And so these people went back and died to make room for all the healthy people who were going to get sick from this, who would need those ventilators and need those ICU beds. Well, Andrew Cuomo's in big trouble now for, making these healthcare decisions for all these people. And so much better to do medicine on a more local approach. This big community type of effort to fight a disease, I think as time will go on, that this was found to be completely unnecessary and very harmful. Thank you for listening. This is Philip Corper. This is the Philip Corper Show. Bye-bye.